Hello, everyone. Past governors, past District Governor Tim, past District Governors David and Milton, DG Lyle, welcome. Fellow Rotarians, it's Maundy Thursday, the day before Good Friday. And what a good day to engage and be enthralled in the working with youth that we're going to have by another expert, PDG Timschuler. As we know in our district, the youth and throughout Rotary the world over, we have special ways to treat to youth. And we need to be reminded. So, because sometimes we take it for granted that we know, and we know until we don't know. So this is the time where we're going to learn how we deal with them, how we mentor them, how we engage them, and how we as Rotarians are to treat to our youth. It is session 12 of 14, as District Trainee-elect Luana mentioned. It's been a very enlightening 12 sessions so far, and I think that 11 sessions so far. I think that we're going to end on a really high note for the pre-pets. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for joining us this evening. And without any further ado, I'm just going to hand you back. I just encourage you, please, to stick with the Learning Center. You always have something to read there, and the information is always available. So I look forward to hearing your comments throughout the session, and I will see you after. Thank you.
Thank you, DGE Sonia. Past District Governor Timothy C. Schuler was the first member of the Rotary Club of Seminole Lake to be inducted after the club charter in October 1980. He remains an active member today, 40 years later. He has held the office of club president twice and engaged with almost every other position in the club. Tim has also been an assistant district governor for 2007-2008, district foundation chair, district trainer, and general counsel to not only the district, but also Rotary Florida Pets, the Caribbean Partnership, Handwash, S40L, and the Rotary Leadership Institute. He has been associated with the Rotary Florida Pets since its inception in 2004, serving as its training coordinator in 2008 to 2010 and the chair in 2012. PDG Tim has been his district's representative to Rotary's Council on Legislation since 2013. Tim was also instrumental in bringing the Rotary Leadership Institute, a grassroots leadership and Rotary information learning experience, to his district. He was the second person to chair the Rotary Leadership Institute Sunshine Division in 2008-2010, which covers Georgia, Florida, and parts of the Caribbean, and served again as interim chair in 2018. He is one of the 21 inaugural members of the recently formed International Board of RLI, and in 2018 was honored as the recipient of the organization's Merit Award. Rotary International has also honored Tim by bestowing upon him Rotary's most prestigious award for meritorious service. Tim is a native of Cincinnati, Ohio, and lived most of his younger years in Baltimore, Maryland, went back to University of Dayton for college, then 5 years in the U.S. Army with service in Germany, Vietnam, and stateside in the 82nd Airborne Division. After leaving the service, he attended the Stetson Law School and has been practicing law continuously since he was licensed in 1977. When not serving Rotary, Tim has his own law practice from which he has been attempting to semi-retire without much success. He is married to Barbara. He has 5 adult children and 11 grandchildren. Tim and Barbara are both Paul Harris Fellows and major donors with the Rotary Foundation. Past District Governor Tim, I welcome you this afternoon.
Thank you, Lana. That wouldn't be any better of an introduction had I written it myself. I appreciate that. All right, let's see whether we can get this PowerPoint going. And, all right, have y'all got it seen up there? Okay, good. Thank you, David. All right. Typically, when I do this presentation live, and when I got the invitation from past District Governor David several months ago to make this presentation for you, I said, "Oh boy, I get to go down to the Caribbean." Well, like here we're all still working on doing the Zooms, and I do appreciate the opportunity to present to you. Governor-elect Sonia has put the pressure on me by saying you had 11 wonderful, exciting presentations before mine. And we hope to end with this one on a high note as well. And so I hope I'm able to deliver for you and do that. But typically, as I said, when I do this presentation live, I usually start off by tripping up the stage. And I do that intentionally, although several times I forgot to tell the sound crew or the hotel people that it was an intentional thing. And lo and behold, they do what they're supposed to do. They call for emergency services because somebody fell going up the stage, which just makes me, know that my acting career is successful. But the point of the tripping up the stage, and obviously we get up and show that I'm okay, is to show folks that yes, there are risks in whatever we do in Rotary when we put on live events. And the purpose of my presentation this evening, I know Governor-elect Sonia wants to direct most of this towards youth, but I'm kind of addressing both the general risk that you have as a Rotary club and as an incoming club president in running your club, be it a youth program or be it just your regular meeting or some other event, because a lot of the parts of what we're doing go across the spectrum of everything we do in Rotary. It's not just youth that we're trying to protect. It's each other. It's visitors that come to our events. It's the volunteers who work at those events. So I'm going to concentrate somewhat on youth as we go through. But the introduction is just basically going to talk about some of the risky business that you've got out there, the risk that you encounter in being a club president. Not to scare you. The intent is not to scare you, to chase you away, and force your clubs to go out and find a new president in the next month or two, but to make you aware of what some of the risks are so that you can be prepared for those. You can mitigate those, and you can have a successful and enjoyable event, whether it's a youth program or some other fundraising program, without any of the risk or problems that may surface. It's kind of like since we're doing so many Zoom meetings these days, it's kind of like in the cybersecurity world, where if you hire a cybersecurity firm to check on your company and see whether you're protected from attacks, usually what they do is they try and infiltrate, they try and hack into your business and find out where your vulnerabilities are so that you can then increase and improve your reaction to those vulnerabilities, shut any open doors that lead to those vulnerabilities, and then be able to run a successful business or a successful cyber activity without the threat of being hacked. And so it's the same thing in the Rotary world. Is we want to kind of look at what we do as if we were the hacker. We were the person that's looking to see what the vulnerabilities are so that we can plan for those vulnerabilities and shut the door to leaving anything open where somebody could get injured, hurt, or harassed, or any other things that we're going to be talking about. So that's primarily, why we're doing this and how we're giving this presentation this evening. Let me see whether we can get this thing moving. It didn't move on my end. All right. Here we go. So the objectives, what I want to, and if I'm moving too fast, somebody just going to put your hand up and let me know. I know this is being interpreted as we move forward, but as a lawyer and past governor, I have a tendency to speak fast. But if you need to slow me down, somebody just give me that hint clue, and I will do so. But what we want to look at here this evening is we want to look at what some of the legal issues are that you're going to face in your coming year. We want to look at how you're going to manage those, because again, as I just said, you need to, you know what they are, and then you need to do something with them. You don't just identify them, you got to manage those things. And then specifically, we're going to address some of the issues that deal directly with the youth. When we're talking about liabilities that you have as a club or a club president, the first thing that we typically talk about is general liabilities. Those are things where there typically may be some monetary penalties for injuring someone, or there could be some injury to your reputation as a club. And that's where a lot of people think about, well, gee whiz, maybe this doesn't really apply in my particular country or the way we do things in this area of the world. The legal liabilities that we may be looking at from the Rotary International viewpoint, or what I look at it for the pets, may not apply. But you've got a reputation for your club that you want to deal with and you want to protect as well. So even though there may not be a legal obligation imposed upon you with doing some of the things I want to talk about, things could affect your reputation and the reputation of your club if they're not done properly. The second area we want to talk about is typically when there's insurance involved, there's what they call directors and officers liability, errors and omissions insurance. But so the second area of liability is things that your board does, things that you do in your official capacity, decisions that you make that may affect somebody's membership, decisions that you make that may or may not affect the finances of your club. And so that's the second area of liability that we want to talk about. The thing that you need to think about when you're thinking about liability and you're thinking about how to protect yourself is the test of what we would call negligence is whether you're doing or not doing something that another reasonable person would have done or would not have done in similar circumstances. So that's the kind of the thing that you want to think about when you're analyzing and you're trying to make a decision as to something that you're going to do. Do we need to do it differently? Do we need to put certain extra precautions in? Is what would somebody else, that reasonable person, which is, obviously a fictitious individual, but that's what keeps lawyers going, is defining this reasonable person standard. But, what would somebody else in similar circumstances do or not do in order to keep people protected in this particular circumstance? So where we're going with this, so what are some of the general type of liability claims? Well, the first one is slip and falls. Kind of the example that I used in the introduction, where I would typically slip, fall going up the stage. The question then is, who's at fault for that? Is it my responsibility? Was I the klutz and am I responsible for my own injury? Is the hotel that we were at, are they responsible because perhaps the steps were at a much higher angle or depth than what they should have been? Or was there loose carpeting at the top of the stairs, which caused me to trip? Was the pets organization that invited me there, were they responsible for the injury because they're the ones that set up the stage and they had wires going across the top of the platform that I walked up to get up onto the platform on the top of the stairs, and perhaps they're the one that put the wires there that I tripped over. So who's responsible? Is anybody responsible? Because if there's no injury, there typically is no responsibility. So these are some of the things that you have to look at when there's a slip and fall. And again, it all boils down to the awareness. When you're running an event, make sure that you're aware of the surroundings. Again, think like you're the security analyst or the risk manager and look around the venue. Are there things that could cause somebody to slip and fall? Are there things that are dangerous, something that could fall from overhanging platforms? Things of this nature, things that you can control, just be aware of them. And then from the other aspect, there's always the issue of potential property damage. Does somebody, if I fell going up the stage, well, if I fell into the speakers and the audio visual equipment, okay, now there's some damage to the property of somebody's property, whether that's pets' properties, whether it's mine, whether it belongs to the district, whether it belongs to the hotel. So now there's been some property damage in addition to some physical damage that I might have suffered having fallen down. So who's responsible for that? I like to tell the story of when I was running or chairing the Rotary Leadership Institute in the Sunshine Division, and you all are part of the Sunshine Division of the Rotary Leadership Institute, and I hope that many of you have been to sessions. Unfortunately, in this last year, we've not been able to have a lot of, if any, live sessions, but we have been doing really successful with the online versions. And I'm hoping that you're continuing your Rotary Leadership Institute education online. But when we met in person, there was an instance once in South Florida that I was observing another discussion leader leading a class. And we were in one of these college facilities that was pretty fancy. And they had a wall up in the front of the classroom that was one of these walls that you could write on. Okay, it's kind of like a chalkboard, but the whole wall was that way. And you use a magic marker type of thing, and you can write. Well, we like to train our discussion leaders to use the room, use poster boards, whatever, to write down ideas that the participants are spitting out during the discussions. If you've been to an RLI, you know how that works, and we're getting a lot of input from all of the individual participants. And so the person that was taking notes for the discussion leader was writing all over that front wall, and they filled it up and they wanted to go on. They had more things they wanted to write. So they moved to a side wall and they continued writing on the wall. Well, unfortunately, that side wall was not one of these special type of walls that you could write on. And so the magic marker that he was using for the front wall, which was erasable, was not erasable on that side wall. And so RLI ended up having to furnish some new painting and to clean another wall for that particular college, because we were responsible. We're the ones that were conducting the meeting. We're the ones who wrote on the wall. And so there was injury to somebody else's property, damage to that property. We had to fix it. We had to pay for it. We had to do it. So again, that's something that, ever since then, we made sure that our discussion leaders and were aware that if there are special techniques in the classrooms, there are special walls, make sure where they are and watch the people so they don't go writing off onto walls where they shouldn't be onto. But again, something you need to be aware of, you need to kind of watch for, anticipate, and brief people as the best you can on what the potential liabilities are. When we talk about directors and officers of liability or employment type of liabilities, a lot of times that's a question of, did your board or did you make decisions that follow the rules? Rotary has rules and procedures, and I hope you're all aware of what they are. The standard club constitution, the Rotary International bylaws, suggested club bylaws, the Rotary Code of Policies, and I'm sure your district has its own manual procedure or policies. And we're going to talk about some of those policies as we proceed later on here this evening. But the policies are there for a purpose. And if you as a club officer or your club board fails to recognize those policies, because number one, you didn't know they existed because nobody taught you, or you didn't look them up, or you just were too lazy to take a look at what they were when somebody told you what they were or where you should go to look at them, and you failed to follow those policies, you're going to have some liability. Your directors, your board, you individually could have some liability for failing to follow the rules if somebody gets injured from that. And we'll talk about some of the type of injuries in a second. But the second aspect of that is if you fail to put good policies in effect. And that's what we're talking about when it comes to youth activities. If you fail, if you're having an activity that you're working with youth if you have an Interact club or you're doing a RILA event, and you fail to put policies in effect that talk about getting parental permissions to take photographs, or getting parental permissions for the students to do an overnight, or some of the other things that we'll be talking about shortly, but you fail to put these policies in effect, you fail to communicate these policies to the people who are involved. My example with writing on the walls, if the discussion leaders fail to tell the people they've enlisted to take notes, only to use the front wall, not the side walls, then they're going to be held liable because they didn't do anything to advise the people that were doing the work of how to do it, where to do it, and how to do it safely. So you could have some liabilities. Where Rotary International sees the biggest liability in this area, and the biggest claims that they get up at RI, have to do with membership. And it has to do with terminating a member or dealing with a member who's got problems that have come up since you admitted that person into your club. Hopefully you've done a good background check before you admitted them into your club. You know that they're a good person, they've got good integrity, good ethics, they don't have financial issues, they don't have any abuse issues in the background or harassment issues, that sort of thing. But all of a sudden, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, something happens within their life and they are not the good stellar Rotarian that they used to be. And now all of a sudden you may have to consider terminating them, or perhaps you should terminate them and you don't take any action to terminate them. You got to be careful because they are members of your community. And if you go about terminating them in the wrong way, or you go about talking about them and spreading rumors of their financial difficulties without having any real background, or you spread rumors about how they've harassed somebody else, or they're engaged in bad business practices without investigating, and you've damaged their reputation, then you may have problems where you've got liability. You've got to be careful with that. But on the same time, at the same token, if they are a member who does have problems, who is harassing somebody else, whether it's somebody else in your club, or they're harassing a youth member, or they're abusing a youth, or they're abusing another member, then you have a responsibility, because Rotary policies say you must deal with that member. You must either suspend them or terminate them, or somehow at least counsel with them in order to deal with the problem and make sure that it does not grow and fester and become a much larger problem. And then the other problem that you have from a director's and officer's standpoint is liability for not enforcing those rules. And that's kind of what I'm just talking about, is if you've got rules that say, that members are not to harass other members, and we'll talk about what harassment is shortly, but they're not supposed to harass other members, and you get reports of a member who's continually harassing somebody else, and you do nothing about it, you don't talk to that member, you don't investigate it, you don't terminate or suspend the member, then you've got some liabilities because you failed to enforce some of the rules. So, we've talked about a little bit from the membership side as how that can be an issue. Let's talk about finances. This is another issue where you could get into trouble as a club president or club officer. You've got to make sure that you're not just relying on your club treasurer to do their job. You trust that they're going to do that. They've been elected by your club. You've vetted them. You've perhaps recommended them to be the club treasurer, however you select them. You probably have them give monthly reports if you have a monthly board meeting. But a lot of times those reports are just summary reports. You want to make sure that somebody, if you don't want to have the club or the board look at the entire detail, the check report, all the checks that were issued, the detail of all the income, go back and look at the detail, just not the summary. Somebody needs to do that besides the person who writes the checks. It doesn't have to be the whole board. If the president does that or the president-elect, at least you can say, well, somebody else has looked the reports over. But we have a saying that says, trust but verify. We trust Rotarians that they're not going to cheat. They're not going to steal. They're not going to, manipulate the books. But I've seen it happen. We've actually had it happen in the early days of the Rotary Leadership Institute. We had one of our treasurers who took over $60,000 out of the Rotary Leadership Institute Sunshine Division Treasury. We found it by some oversight. We confronted the person. We got the money back. That person is no longer a Rotarian, but it happens. And this was somebody that none of us would have ever suspected. But they run a business. They were running short of cash in the business. They figured, the money was available. They were going to be able to get it back in their business. They'd be able to put it back into our checking account before we found it. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. So it does happen. So be careful with it. Verify. Don't commingle your funds. If you got various accounts, if you got a special account for special projects, leave them in those accounts. Don't commingle those things. Review and reconcile. And typically don't have the same person who writes the checks and manages the books be the person who reconciles or audits monthly the bank statements against those books. That's just some general background. But now what I want to talk about is the policies. I mentioned that, Rotary's got policies, and you need to know what these policies are, and you need to take effect of these policies and put them in effect in your club, in everything that you do, all the events that you run, and specifically when you're doing things with the youth. And in 2019, Rotary International enhanced and basically took a much broader stand on its policies when it comes to diversity. And you've seen a lot today on diversity, equity, and seminars in those areas, and a lot of talks from Rotary in that direction. But Rotary basically said that we need to recognize that all of our clubs are made up of diverse members. We have different beliefs, we have different sensitivities, and we need to be aware of that, because we need to maintain a harassment-free environment for everybody. And where I may not be sensitive to certain jokes that may be told, somebody else might be. And so you got to be careful, and you got to, again, be aware. Again, that cybersecurity awareness thing is, how would somebody else react to what I'm doing or what I'm saying? And if you think it's offensive to somebody else, then it probably is. Therefore, don't do it. All right. And then Rotary has put on us a responsibility that we must report and deal with suspicions of any sort of harassment and any actual harassment we see. And as a club, if you don't do that, then there are potential penalties that you will have for not reporting or dealing with the harassment. Again, the policy goes on to say that, Rotary, we want to make sure that everybody maintains an environment that is free of all sort of harassment, no matter what it is. Club meetings, events, fundraisers, youth activities, whatever we're doing. And everybody that attends whatever it is should be expecting a safe environment. And they should be expecting, and they should be delivered an environment that is totally free of any kind of harassment, whether it's harassment because of age, unwelcome physical contact, advances, whatever it happens to be. And we'll talk about that in the next slide when we define harassment. But we have to promote environments that have safety, courtesy, dignity, and respect for everybody. That's how we want to be treated. We have to make sure that that's how we're treating our guests, our youth, and our visitors, and our club members. Rotary basically defines harassment as any conduct, whether it's verbal or whether it's physical, that denigrates, insults, or offends somebody else, whether it's because of their age, their ethnicity, their race, their color, their abilities, their religion, their socioeconomic status, their culture, their sex, their sexual orientation, or their gender identity, just to define those. And there's other things that come up constantly where somebody could be offended. So it's basically, you got to be careful because there's all kind of things that could lead to what is harassment. Talking about somebody's clothing, putting them down for some reason because of the clothes they wear, could be harassment. Talking about their economic status could be harassment. The car they drive, the house they live in. So it's not just necessarily race and culture, it's all these other aspects as well that we have to be careful of when we're dealing with issues of potential harassment. So let's talk about sexual harassment first, because with harassment, there's basically two types of harassment. One is what we call overt, okay, or what we call quid pro quo. I'll do something for you, you do something for me. That's overt sexual harassment. It could be male to female, which is what you typically think of, but it could also be female to male. It could be male to male, female to female. It can be an adult to another adult, an adult to a youth, okay? It could be two youth on each other, or it can be, any variety or combination of those age categories. It's kind of the example, that, if we're talking about overt sexual harassment, in the Rotary world, it'll be, hey, if you have sexual relations with me, I'll make sure you do not get a committee assignment. As opposed to, you have sexual relations with me, I'll make sure you get something that you want. But, it can be any way around. It's, again, quid pro quo. You do something for me, I'll do something for you. It's rather obvious when we're talking about that sort of harassment. But the second sort of harassment is what we call a hostile environment. That's less obvious. That's the hostile jokes. That's a culture where you don't recognize that somebody else is sensitive to the types of jokes that you're doing. They're not sensitive to some comments that you make. They're sensitive to, again, comments you make about attire or looks. We had a member of my club way back when. Our club used to have we still have what we call, not Happy Dog, I can't even think what it is right now, but basically we opened it up with some sort of joke or happy moments to start the meeting. And it used to be we would rotate who would open up with the joke or the thought of the day. And quite honestly, this was, back in the 1980s, the jokes sometimes got to be awful raunchy because we were pretty much the old white men's club. But we had an elderly gentleman who was a school principal who was offended by that type of language and that type of jokes. But nobody really realized it or never thought about it. We didn't have any women at the club at the time. And so it's just kind of something that we did until this gentleman brought it to our attention and said, I don't feel comfortable with the way we're doing things. And so we changed that culture. Those type of jokes are no longer acceptable. We still have the opening, session where we talk about something that's funny or something that's enlightening, but we're sensitive to who's in the room. And now that we're on Zoom, we're sensitive. It could be anybody, it could be online. So it's that hostile environment that you've got to be aware of. And when you're dealing with harassment issues, you've also got to be aware that it's not the intent that's important. We don't look at whether you intended to harass somebody or to offend somebody, but what you did actually did offend them. That's what's important. Behavior sometimes often gets misinterpreted. Another story, and I'm using these stories as examples because they're real life examples that I've had to deal with in dealing as general counsel for a lot of different Rotary entities over time. But we had an incident where a female club president, one of her members was, one of these huggy kissy type of persons. And he did that all the time. And he would always come up and put his arm around her shoulder at meetings. And she really didn't have any problem with that until they had a holiday party, and she was wearing a strapless dress, so she had open shoulders, exposed shoulders. And at that party, he went up, put his hand around her like he normally does, but now it was on her bare shoulders, and she took offense to that. He obviously had no intent to mean anything sexual from that or to do anything offensive by that, but she took offense to that because it was on her bare shoulders. And so she reported him, and we dealt with it. And again, explained to her that that's just who he is. She let him do that when she had, full tops on, and he didn't really think about it any differently. And so we're able to resolve the problem, and never became a big issue. But again, had it been she didn't report it and we didn't get into it and talk to her and talk to him about it, it could have led to a much larger problem that festered within that club, and could have led to her quitting, him quitting, the club splitting up. These are things that I've seen in other clubs where they don't deal with problems that need to be dealt with. So again, you need to be sensitive to the way other people may feel and what their reactions are. And again, the test is, if you're unsure about it, then don't do it. If you got to think about it and you don't feel comfortable about it, don't do it. Within the club, you need to create policies. You need to publish those policies, and then you need to enforce them. If you do that, then you're going to be protected from the risk. Again, you create those policies by knowing what Rotary's policies are, and then putting those policies into your own club policies. But then also, again, that awareness thing I keep bringing home is anticipating, what could happen from a risky standpoint, and creating policies that could prevent those from becoming risk that could harm someone. And then let people know what those policies are. And then if you've got them in effect, then make sure that you enforce them. When we talk about youth, and let's start concentrating a little bit more now on the youth, we're talking about, the RILA activities, Interact, Rotaract, any other youth activities that you may be having and sponsoring in your club or in your district. And Rotary in general strives to maintain a safe environment for everybody, but especially for youth and for those who participate in youth activities. Not just the youth who are participating, but your volunteers, as well as your active Rotarians and the parents or guests who may be attending any of these functions. They too could be injured, by an accident type of thing, or could be harassed by someone else, or could have their sensitivities feel bad by a joke or by somebody doing something that offends them. So again, it's everybody who participates. You need to look at the bigger picture. Okay, the volunteers need to be protected as much as we and the youth do from not only physical abuse, and again, the physical abuse is the obvious things where somebody gets physically hurt. Okay, they get in a fight and somebody gets punched and they get hurt. Somebody gets shoved and they fall down and they get hurt. A sexual abuse where they get hurt. Anything that's physical where somebody gets touched and physically injured is physical abuse. And again, that's pretty much the standard and the easier thing to control. But the next one we talk about is neglect. Okay, neglect is the failure to adequately provide for someone else's needs. The obvious of that is food. If you're having a youth event, and you're having it all day long, are you providing adequate food? Are you providing healthy food? Is the food, do you have rules that require that the food has to be inspected by your health departments or something? Have you done all of that? Are you providing them shelter? If you're having an outdoor activity and it's too hot or it's storming, do you have provisions to be able to provide that they can go inside? Or you've got something to protect them from the elements. But it's also mental issues, emotional support, especially when we're talking about RILA activities and things of that nature. is, you've got kids that may be away from home, or Rotary Youth Exchange. You've got kids who are away from home, maybe for the very first time, and they don't feel comfortable. And they may not be reporting to your club advisors or to their Interact advisors or any other adult that may be in charge, because they don't feel comfortable. They don't know the language. They're afraid of some retribution. And so they begin to start withdrawing or feeling bad, and they're emotionally withdrawing. If we don't deal with that, if we don't give them counseling, we don't recognize that, then we are neglecting their emotional well-being. And that's something that we've got to protect against, and we've got to not do. That also includes cyber harassment. We see that a lot now in the Rotary Youth Exchange issues that we cross every once in a while, is that, these kids start in Facebook and, in chatting and TikTok and all these other, social media things, start, talking, and it may not be intended to be harmful, but they may talk nastily about or insult another member of the Youth Exchange team from a different culture, not knowing that it really offends that particular person. So again, you've got to talk to the Youth Exchange, and most Youth Exchange programs have these kind of introductory talks to the youth when they come into your district about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. But cyber stalking, cyber harassment is a big issue, and that's an area that you got to be aware of and that you got to take care of. It's not just, joking about somebody's socioeconomic effort or sexual jokes. It's a whole range of things that could potentially insult or hurt somebody or offend somebody. And most of the time, it's unwitting. It's not intended to be that way. Sexual abuse and harassment, we've talked about that a little bit. I think that's usually, more obvious than the neglect area may be. Kind of like the physical contact, the physical abuse area is, but then the emotional or the verbal abuse. Again, the cyber abuse, where you're insulting somebody on chat, or you're talking about them, not directly to them. We see that with youth a lot of time, where two different people on Facebook are chatting back and forth, and they're talking poorly about the third person who may not be involved in that chat, but they may end up seeing a copy of that chat or that Facebook post because somebody else reposted, and so it eventually gets to that third person, and they see it, and then they end up, having the abuse or the harassment that they feel. So again, you've got to be careful, and you've got to talk to these youth and adults and anybody involved in the program things that you've got to be careful of, so that we don't do it where people get the issues. Some of the things that you got to be careful of, that a lot of times people don't realize, that these end up leading to what may have started as an appropriate activity ends up becoming inappropriate. And again, when and where it crosses the line is very difficult to tell, but you got to watch for them. And if you got supervisors, and if we're talking about youth, you've got yourself as Rotarians, the adult volunteers, you got to be watching for this, and you got to be recognizing, what could have been appropriate 5 minutes ago may not be appropriate now. And so the first one we talked about is horseplay. And that's one of the biggest ones, where, you see in the pictures I've got up is, kids just, playing around with each other, tickling one another, pretending that they're fighting, or just, starting to fight. Well, sometimes, again, all of a sudden, the hands start moving where they're not supposed to be, or the fight gets to be a little bit more physical than what it started out to be. And now you've got the potential of somebody getting hurt, somebody getting abused, somebody feeling like they've been harassed. So again, this is one of the biggest areas where we run into problems, where you got to supervise, you got to keep an eye out, and you got to step in if you think that it could be leading to something that's inappropriate, or already, has become inappropriate. The next one is, inappropriate comments. And I've talked about that a little bit, but again, the pictures I put up, is somebody leaves a note on somebody else's laptop, or if it's a overnight event, in their room, on their desk, on their bed, hey, sexy. Well, again, that could be other person could feel that that's inappropriate, that's they don't feel sexy, they don't feel welcome by your comments, or they don't know who it's coming from, and so they feel maybe they're being stalked. Or the other comment I put up is, you're putting something on there about being a loser. Well, you may have been joking, or the person may have been joking when they put that up there, but the person who's the recipient of that note may, or that comment, may feel abused by it. So watch out for those. And when you see those kind of things happening, again, put a stop to them right away, investigate what's happening, and find out whether it's, it's an intentional thing, or whether the person just didn't realize that it was harmful to somebody else. Make them aware that their actions are harmful and get them to stop what they're doing. Next area basically is, controversial commentary. And this is one where, again, they're talking back and forth to somebody about a third person. The third person may not know about it right away, but what they're saying is harmful to that third person. You may be repeating a rumor which you don't know is true or not, and that therefore causing some harm to the reputation of the third person. You've got to be very careful in those particular areas. Inappropriate touching, pretty obvious. Questionable jokes, again, pretty obvious. But again, it's, a lot of times people don't realize that the jokes that they're telling or the comments that they're making are offensive to somebody else. But they are, and you've got to be aware of that. The last story, not the last story, because I always tell stories, but the next story I'll tell involves you all in the Caribbean. Back in the day when I was governor, we did, and that's back when we had group study exchanges. Dick McComb was my classmate, was the governor in District 7020, not 7030. But I sent a team to 7020, and he sent a team to Florida. But my team included a young woman who hadn't dated much, if at all. And so we sent her down the Caribbean, and you all have a nice reputation of being friendly. And there were some friendly male members of the clubs that she was visiting that, made overtures to her that she just didn't know how to deal with. And she felt she was being sexually harassed, and she wasn't. They were just being friendly. But she reported back that that she was being sexually harassed by some of the male counterpart Rotarians in the Caribbean. So I, immediately got on it with Dick McComb, and we looked into it. And all it was we had a Caribbean male being a Caribbean male and being over friendly to a woman who is not used to that kind of conduct and activity and didn't know how to handle it. Again, once we talked to both sides, we talked with her a little bit, we talked to him a little bit, it wasn't a problem anymore. But again, it could have been a big problem if she didn't bring it up and we didn't deal with it and we didn't talk about it at all. And another one is, today in virtual meetings, can there be harassment in a virtual meeting? Yes, there can. I investigated actually a sexual harassment charge within another Rotary club. I won't say which club. It was not in my district. I won't say where it was, because I do a lot of this for a lot of districts throughout all of Florida, Georgia, the Caribbean. But we were having a club that was having a Zoom meeting, very much like we are here. And we had an individual who was on the Zoom meeting who had just come back from a run, a female member, and she was late to get onto the meeting. So she didn't take a shower or change. She just came on with her running attire and clothes. And one of the male members on the Zoom meeting asked her if she would just move her camera a little lower, okay? And, obviously that had some sexual innuendo to it. and she was offended by that, but didn't do anything about it at that point, just laughed it off. And then she left to say, well, I've got another meeting I've got to go to. I'm going to sign off. I'm going to go take a shower and get ready for my other meeting. This same gentleman said, well, why don't you just take the camera with you to the shower? Obviously, again, very obvious sexual innuendo. So she ended up reporting that to her club president. They couldn't, her club board did not want to deal with it. This was the male counterpart was a good longtime member of the club. Some of the other members of the board did not feel as though that was harassment. So they didn't deal with it. So they reported it to the district governor. District governor then asked me if I would come in and investigate for them, which I did. And to me, it was obvious. But the individual just didn't realize. I mean, he didn't intend to insult her, but he just thought that was being a good old boy, and he thought she was just a good old girl and went along with the good old boys. And that's not the way we operate anymore. I'm not sure it's the way that we operated 10 years ago or should have operated if we did operate that way 10 years ago, but it's certainly not the way we operate today. So again, it's something you deal with. And so there can be, and there is, and are instances of cyber stalking and cyber harassment. Some of the issues that you run across in recognizing that a child, a youth participant has felt some sort of harassment or abuse or some sort of anxiety are these particular areas that you want to look into. You're going to see that they're going to display some sort of anxiety, or they're going to show depression. Somebody who was not depressed, was a very outgoing and sensitive individual, or not so sensitive individual, all of a sudden has a change in their attitude. They begin to show some anxiety. They begin to show some depression. They get to be aggressive when they never used to be that way before. They're late to come into things where they used to always be early. They're beginning to withdraw and not be as open and participating as they used to be. Sudden changes in what they're doing. They're not acting their age any longer. These are things that you got to watch for. These are signs that something is wrong, and you've got to get in. You've got to talk to them. What all of a sudden is the problem? Again, youth are going to typically tell you everything is fine when it may not be, because they just don't know how to deal with it and how to deal with it differently. I'm going to move along because I know that you all want to, probably have some questions, and I'm running out of time. But again, your responsibility is, if you see something, you need to report it. And then somebody in the club needs to investigate it. Who do you report it to? There's got to be policy who you report it to. And then you investigate it. When you investigate it, have somebody who investigates to know what they're doing. It could potentially, if you're investigating the accused person who's doing the harassment, maybe having the sponsor of that club member, it might be a good person to do it because they probably know that person well, but they may not be, because they may be a person who shares the same beliefs as that. Having a past president may not be the right person to do it because they may not be sensitive to the issues, or they may not be trained in some of those things, especially if you're dealing with a youth. So you want somebody who's experienced and trained in those areas. You want to make sure that you let people know that they're not to feel like there's any retaliation for reporting, or even if they're the person who's being accused, that you're not going to retaliate against them simply because they didn't understand what they were doing was wrong, but they now understand, and if they don't do it again, there's not going to be any particular problems. The international policy, and again, you can read all this later, it basically says that the club must report it, the club must investigate it, your board must deal with it, and if you don't deal with it, then your club could be disenfranchised by Rotary International. Rotary International could take away your charter. Your district governor could do something about it, or you may have personal liability because your club didn't deal with the harassment problem. You just let it go on and on and on and failed to deal with it. So these are some of the things that you need to be very careful about and make sure that you're doing something. When you're mentoring somebody, consider the environment where you're mentoring them in. you don't want to be in a private room where there's no windows, it's just you and a young child. Make sure that, it's open or there's other people there, that you always got the consent of the parents. If you're doing an overnight activity where you're taking photographs, or basically just to allow a youth to participate in anything that you do, it's always best, to involve the parent, whether it's a written consent or at least a verbal consent, that, the parents know what's going on. You communicate with them, you let the parents know what you expect in the activity, so, they can understand what you're going to be doing with their child. Vary up your schedule a lot of times. This is just from a risk management standpoint. If somebody's going to accuse me of some sort of harassment or some sexual harassment activity, and they say, well, this happened 6 months ago, and so the investigator says, well, when did it happen? Well, it happened Wednesday afternoon or the second Wednesday of the month of January at 2 o'clock. Well, how do you remember the time so well? Well, because we always met at 2 o'clock on the second Wednesday of every month. Well, if you vary up the times that you met meeting with them, well, they've got to actually remember the specific time that they're accusing me of doing something. And if they say, oh, the second Wednesday of January, but my schedule shows that second January of February, I was in Evanston, Illinois, then no, I can't be guilty of what they're accusing me of. So vary your schedule, and that, that prevents them from being able to come up with a standard excuse or time frame. And then, set appropriate boundaries. What's expected of you, what's expected of the youth that you're mentoring or participating with. What do the parents expect you to be doing with that child? If you're taking them, if you're mentoring where it's, like kind of like a big brother, big sister type of program, where you're going to be taking them to different activities, that the parent understands that, acknowledges that, allows you to take them to these different activities, to take them to a club meeting, whatever it is that you're happening to do. With that, okay, I spoke as slow as I can, but as fast as I can to get it all in, so that I can leave some time for you all to have some questions, and I'll be glad to take those questions at this time.
All right, thank you, PDG. Tim, you spoke a lot, very close to my heart. I really like how you moved the discussion, moving from liability and duty of care all the way on to talking about youth and the things that can impact a youth as well. So thank you so much. Quite a different presentation, but I think quite relevant to our district, because a lot of times we have events where we don't think about the liability or the consequences of anything happening and what are the liabilities for the club. We do have some questions here, so I can go right to the question. There's a question here. It seems that to a certain extent, a club would assume or have to assume a certain duty of care and possible degrees of such, so as to adequately and appropriately cover all possible persons and groups. How would you suggest that a club clearly and sufficiently define the scope of its duty of care?
Well, again, that duty of care goes back to that fictional reasonable person I talked about. This sounds like we may have a lawyer in the group talking about duty of care. But, it amounts to understanding what the policies are from Rotary, because, again, when I'm talking about harassment, so your duty of care is to make sure that there is no environment where somebody can be physically abused, where they can be harassed. But it goes down to the specific circumstance, and again, it goes to what I talked about of being aware. What is the activity that you're going to conduct, and look at it from the standpoint of, what would be expected if you were a outside third party looking at it from above or from outside. What duty of care would you expect the Rotary Club to be providing to those participants? Because every activity is going to have a different set of duties. Obviously, the policies that I showed in some of the slides set the primary duty, and that is a harassment-free environment is the primary duty. How you get there depends on the circumstance. I know that's a nebulous answer, but that's the best I can do for you.
All right, it's risky business.
It is.
Given that a club, another question, given that a club should seek coverage such as property damage and personal injury protection, should a club maintain certain coverage options as on an ad hoc basis or only for an event, or maintain such as a continuous basis year-round, where later they can appropriately apply at any time and at any situation where it's needed? But I think there's a requirement by Rotary International, all clubs have liability insurance.
Yes, it is, and especially when it comes to youth exchange activities, there has to be insurance on those particular activities. I apologize. I don't know how you all handle it down in the Caribbean. You know, in the U.S., Rotary International provides liability insurance for the clubs, and that's part of our international dues that the U.S.-based clubs pay to international. But if there's nothing like that in the Caribbean, then yes, the individual clubs need to make sure somehow you do have some sort of insurance protection.
Well, that's the key that you mentioned that, because in Guyana, we do have liability insurance coverage for all the clubs in Guyana. That was organized many years ago because we were, you know, doing it in keeping with what Rotary International had requested. Right. And because we are not a U.S. club, that is a requirement. But I suspect there are many other clubs in the Caribbean that may not have liability insurance, but they should really consider that.
Definitely should.
Definitely. I do have an I have an insurance background too, so.
Good. Well, you can help them out.
Under general liability and employees liability, this is another question. Should a club seek to secure a specific fund or dedicated financial coverage to adequately protect the sustainability of the club if a situation arises where the club or a member of the club is found to be negligent or onerous, thus liable, and for which some form of financial compensation or settlement is required? I guess this is related to the second question, where the insurance is required.
Yeah, if you have insurance and you've got sufficient insurance, you don't really need to worry too much about it because, you know, again, I don't know your legal system that well in 7030, but, you know, here in the U.S., typically if somebody's going after you for some injury, they're just going after the insurance. They're not going to, you know, go, and typically the insurance is going to provide whatever coverage is necessary that's out there. But things to think about, though, is, you know, if you do think you've got a very high risk event that you're doing and you want to protect the club, you know, you got to, again, I don't know your legal system down there, but, you know, if you've got ways of doing secondary type of clubs or incorporating, you know, a charitable foundation and running the activity through the foundation, or through the satellite club, or, you know, some other entity where your funds are not going to be subject to liability because you're not running the program, you're hiring somebody else to run the program for you, is another way of avoiding liability. But typically the best way is just, you know, watch out for it, protect against it, put your policies in place, and get insured.
All right, thank you. There's no other questions here. I don't know if there's any live questions from the participants. Any hands up for live questions?
I have a live question, sure. PP Liz.
Sure.
PDG Tim, so when clubs are developing their youth guidelines on how to engage youth, give us an example of some of the areas that those guidelines should cover. Two that come to mind readily for me are maybe adult Rotarians. A single Rotarian should not be taking a young Rotaractor interactor home from any Rotary event. Is that something that should be in the guidelines? The second one that I can think of offhand is when we're posting pictures of events involving young Rotarians and the Rotaractors and interactors, should we pay attention to their attire? You know, young people tend to dress with very short pants and, you know, sometimes revealing clothing. Do we have a responsibility as Rotarians to not put those sort of pictures out there in cyberspace?
Yes, you do. And there's so many guidelines, it'd be very difficult for me to sit here and just, spout out specific guidelines. But I would direct you to the Rotary Youth Protection Guide, which is a manual that you can get off of the Rotary International website. And it's in all the different languages. That guide has a lot of the specific guidelines that you need to be aware of. But you're absolutely correct. It's, you don't want to have Rotarians one-on-one with youth. You want to have at least, 2 adults with young people. You don't want them traveling one-on-one. You don't want them in rooms one-on-one. You don't want male and female together, in sleeping arrangements and in private scenarios. You do want to get parental consent to overnights, to travels, to use of names, which we typically try and avoid and use first names, if that at all, and definitely pictures. I mean, those, again, it's pretty much common sense things. Travel, whether they can travel in a private car, whether if they're traveling in a private automobile, whether the driver is insured or requiring that the driver does have insurance for that private automobile. Does that help out?
Right. I did see a statement here by PDG Lara, and I wanted to ask a question on that. In Trinidad, our clubs, she's saying, is incorporated to eliminate director liability. Would that absolve you of a liability?
No, it will not if you violate policies. And that's where I said, again, you've got to understand what the policies are. You've got to promulgate those policies and you have to enforce them. If you have insurance, that's to protect your club, and it may be to protect your board as well. But you may have personal liability if you fail to abide by the policies. If you, for example, in this harassment arena, if your club board fails to take action on a harassment issue because you didn't know that the harassment was going on, then, and even though, some court of law would say that, well, you should have known, therefore you're responsible, insurance is probably going to cover that and there's not going to be a problem. But if you knew that the harassment was going on and you knew that the Rotary Code of Policy say you have to investigate and you have to deal with it, and you just ignore it, then the insurance may have an exception where they're not going to cover you because you ignored a policy. You could have prevented this particular incident had you followed the policy and enforced it. Or insurance may cover liability that your board may have, but they may not cover the liability that you personally may have, again, for not following the rules. So again, it's be aware of the rules, follow the rules, enforce the rules, and hopefully you won't have any problems.
Make sure you protect yourself.
Yes.
That's a club. All right, thank you. I'll hand back to PAG Luana.
Thank you, PP Liz and PDG Tim, for a really wonderful and informative presentation, and I can put you on notice that you will be back.
Okay, thank you.
Next
Love
year,
to.
I will be hunting you down for a repeat.
No problem. Next time, let's do it live.
Yes, for sure. PP Cheryl?
Unmute, Cheryl. Cheryl, unmute.
Cheryl, you need to unmute. We're not hearing you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Good evening, everyone. All protocols observed. PDG Tim, thank you so much for this very interesting and insightful presentation where you shared on working with youth and some of the general risk mitigation strategies that our club should employ. We need to, you stress the fact that we need to familiarize ourselves with the all Rotary policies and pointed out some of the pitfalls we can encounter if these policies are not enforced. Thank you so much. To all the members of our training team, thank you again for putting this session together. It's been a long journey to this time. We just have a few more sessions to complete, and I hope that everyone will sign up and attend. To all the technical staff in the background, thank you very much again for ensuring that the session ran smoothly. So everyone, have a good night. Thank you again.
Thank you, PP Cheryl. Just quickly, some housekeeping. A reminder to continue with the Learning Center courses and to register for the remaining 2 sessions. The next one will be held on Tuesday, April 6th. That session will be on district grants and the foundation, and it will be facilitated by none other than our very own, very loved PDG Milton. So please make sure you register, and we will wrap up the session, the pre-pets with a session on public image. I would like to invite District Conference Chair Conrad to give us a few teasers on what we can expect in 3 weeks at our district conference. PP Conrad, over to you. One second, Sean has to unmute you. Or can you unmute yourself? No? Good, you're on.
Yeah, okay, I'm on now. Well, good evening, DG, PDGs, DGE, Rotarians. Thank you very much for giving me 5 minutes. I'm not so sure it's a good time after an hour of listening to a lawyer, but you know, this is what it is. I think I got the greatest job in the whole district. For one, I get to organize the conference twice, right? So with every challenge comes opportunity. And I know we have the most amazing pets. You just see these events here. And we will also have the most amazing district conference. But really and truly, now we need to get everybody registered. And that's why they make me come to talk to you now. I know the attendance tonight has already dropped from 94 to 78. So people are trying to get out. I hope if you're still there, move the cursor away from the leave button at the right bottom of your screen. I really want you all to understand that this is the cheapest pets and conference your club has ever paid for, right? Keep that in mind. You will never gonna get a more amazing conference at a lower price, right? And I will be happy in the next session or the next 2 sessions, talk about some of the wonderful presenters that DG Lyle and DG Sonia have been able to arrange for you. You know, I mean, past RI presidents, current RI presidents, future RI presidents, all are going to be at the conference, an opportunity would have never had before. So keep that in mind, please. I would like tonight that you don't leave if you have a question, right? I would like you, first of all, if I'm allowed, I would love to share the screen for a second. If I can. We need to look at this list, right? It is what it is, and I know other people will help to reduce that list. If you go to the bottom, and I'm not going to call out any names, right? If you go to the bottom, we have now registered, as of the end of the month, 45 clubs. So if you do the math, I think we're short 28 clubs to register to be at Pets and Conference, and it's not something that is negotiable. It's a requirement, and we have no choice. We have to find a way to register. And if you can, I'll be happy tonight to stay with you for as long as it takes. I know some of you want to go for dinner and sign off, but I'll stay here with you until midnight if you need help to register your club. If there's any question, I will answer it for you, because I know we Rotarians are people of action. So don't leave. But if you're happy and you saw your club down that list, or if you know that you're a club that has not registered yet, we can do it right now with you if you want. I'll be happy to briefly walk you through of what you have to do to get registered, providing that it is a question of you not knowing how to do it and not a question of, I really don't care. So it is totally easy. All you have to do is go to the district website. If you have never been there, and then click on to the district conference website and go to registration. It is so easy. And then you click on your club's registration and you can click the mask basically and continue to payment. With this, you have completed your club's registration. Now, 45 clubs have done that, 28 still have to do it. And then there's this other big question that has to do with signing up your individual members, right? On a message from Secretary Soraya earlier in the week, you all got a link to a mask that shows the individual members that somebody in your club will have to input, so we can afterwards allocate individual login credentials for them at the actual PETS and at the actual conference. It was this link here, right, that was in that last email. And I'm doing this now because so many people are asking and say, do I have to do anything else? Is the club registration now completed? Well, this is the last step to give every one of your members and every one of your members' guests or your guests and whoever else you want to invite free access to PETS and conference, unless, of course, your club decides to charge your members something, but that is entirely up to you. There's a direct link here too. If you can't find the registration anymore, then I will stay here after this meeting if you want to, and help any one of you register if you want to do this tonight. But I don't know how else to say this, right? So if anybody has any questions, or if you'd like to do it now, please let me know. If you think it's a good idea we do this together right now, we can do it. I just would love to see, when I next see you in a couple of days, I think on the 6th of April, that our pending clubs has gone from 28 to 14 half. That will be the goal for me in the next few days, that the clubs that are not registered, please register. The club needs you, your own club needs you, the district needs you. We just have to get it done. There's no real way around it. And I'm appealing to all of you to please do it. It has never been easier. It takes 5 minutes, not even 5 minutes. I don't know what else to say, folks, but let's do it. And if you don't want to do it, if you whatever think you're the president or the president-elect and say, I'm not doing this, I have a suggestion for you. Give anybody in your club that you think that wants to do it or can do it, my email address, right? It's not 1-800-CONRAD, it's conradinstlucia@hotmail.com. It's on all the correspondence. Tell them to contact me and I will walk them through and get your club registered. It is something we need to do. And if you don't want to do this, there's another opportunity. The next time at this PETS thing, bring that member, invite him to that pre-PET session and have him or her stay on afterwards, and I will help him or her get your club registered. I really think we can do this. There's no way around it. And I'm here to help you. That's my only job, is to help all of you to attend PETS and all your members and attend conference. And then you get a chance to listen to some of the most amazing presenters that any district conference has ever seen. Please, I see some chat comments there. I haven't even looked what they are. So can you share the link here, please? Sure, I'll put the link in again. The direct link that I had on that document. If you can't, if this does not work, then I'm not sure it works. If that does not work, then you have to go back to that last letter you got from District Secretary Soraya. There's a link in there that says sign up individual for club registrations. I don't think I can copy the link now into the Zoom chat box. Can I?
Sean has put it already, Conrad. It's in the chat.
No, I cannot. That's just the link to the conference. But what has happened is the 45 clubs that have registered now have to go back and have somebody register their members. And that is that other link here. Can you see it? This link here that was on the letter that you got from Soraya. I can't do it, but this is what the link is like, and this is what it was called. Right. I don't know if anyone can go back to the letter you got.
Sean has put
That's the link, and they will all. Sorry?
Sean has put that link
Yeah.
in the chat as well. Yes.
Sorry, this is it. Perfect. Okay. Well, that's really all it is. So I would love to see all of you have that done, right? And if you know somebody wherever you are, I'm not sure any AGs are there, and if you know you have a club that hasn't done it, give them a call, right? And do it. Give them my email address. I will help them, and I know other people will help too, because I think you do not want to deprive any of the clubs to attend PETS and conference. And you don't want to put poor DGE Sonia in a position to not allow that club to serve, right? That president and that secretary to serve because they did not attend. So people, let's do it. And then the app, right? I don't know how to promote the app. We purchased an app because we thought we would have a real conference with real fun. Unfortunately, it is now a virtual conference, and the app does not really have all the applications that we would have liked to have, but we have the app. And I really think every single Rotarian in this should go to the website and download the app. Just go to the district conference website, scroll down to the bottom. You see two big links, one to the App Store and one to Google Play. Install the app by clicking on install. It's less than 5 minutes. All of us can do it. If I can do it, anybody else can do it. People, there's only about 190 folks so far that have downloaded the app. By the next time I see you, that number should be at least 500. And then once we have people on the app, we can send them messages, we can reach them. Until people are on the app, we can't really reach them through the app. So I can't say it any clearer, folks. I'm here. Let's do it, right?
Thank you, PP Conrad. I appreciate you plugging the conference tonight, and we'll continue next week. We're looking forward to hearing about the speakers that you have lined up for us. So thank you so much. You did a great job. All right, so one final thing, please don't forget to send me your names for your club trainers, and that information should include the name, the club they're from, and their telephone number and email address. So please do that for me. And on that note, DG Sonia, any closing comments?
Just wanted to say Tuesday's session with PDG Milton is mandatory for every club who is going to be looking at doing a grant. It is a mandatory session for them. I would have sent the documents, the procedures. Please review them. Please come. Doing a grant is not difficult. It is just, you have to follow the process. So I look forward to everyone attending on Tuesday and being engaged. What a great session we had this evening. More food for thought for us. So thank you, everybody, and happy Easter, blessed Easter, and many drinks to be drunk on Sunday.
Thank you, DG Sonia, and a happy Easter from the training team also. Fly your kites away from electrical wires and have a drink for all of us. Stay safe, everyone. See you on Tuesday. Bye.